You have 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome Bernard Joyce, Helen Gogan and Bridget Casey to the gallery today, as well as the other guests. And thank you, Minister, for making your statement on this urgent matter. Since the first traveller accommodation programme in 2000, the 5-year mandatory plan in each local authority area to provide accommodation, there has been much evidence nationally, and you mentioned it in your statement, of low or no targets being set, higher targets being set, and an over-delivery of standard housing. And sometimes standard housing is the only alternative. It's not what people want, but it is the best and only thing that is on offer. Evidence of lack of adequate planning for population growth, which again you referred to in your statement. Evidence of poor to non-existent delivery of transient accommodation to facilitate nomadism. And this is fundamental to people's sense of well-being, for their sense of identity. I heard people speak very powerfully of people travelling to the Knock Novena, and that's something that's part of people's lives. People don't want to live in Knock, but they like to go to the Novena. So accommodating those kinds of important parts of people's lives are really important to take on board. Evidence of inaction on overcrowding and homelessness. Sites that are out of sight and out of mind. Spring Lane in Cork, you have to really go about finding it. It's off a road, off a road, off a road. In Doneraile, it's up 2 miles off the road. Sites in Galway, we don't see them. And it was like the site that Victor responded to. And overcrowding certainly was a factor of the 10 lives lost in the Carrickmines fire, and it was great to hear your response in your speech. But I hope, Minister, that we're doing enough to make sure that Carrickmines never happens again. And awareness of fire safety and fire risk is one thing, but if you're living in an overcrowded site, Spring Lane, 10 families, it is meant to be, but if 30 families are living there, with the best awareness in the world, you're going to have a fire and you're going to have more tragedies. And I think we need to be honest about it. Local political and community opposition is the major barrier to advancing traveller-specific accommodation. There's hypocrisy. We say we're going to do things on one hand and people act differently on the other. Elected councillors in each local authority are represented on local traveller accommodation consultative committees and charged with overseeing the research and assessment of need by local authorities, officials, and for developing the TAPS programme. But there are no sanctions on local authorities for non- or under-delivery or underspending budgets. You have huge need, you have overcrowding, you have conditions that you couldn't imagine pertaining in a country as prosperous as Ireland when you go onto sites. And yet, as you said in your statement, there's only 59% drawdown. 16 out of the 31 local authorities with no traveller-specific accommodation. According to your recent report on targets under the Rebuilding Ireland strategy, 107 homes were provided for under the Traveller Accommodation Programme, 6.8 million in 2018. This falls far short of the 12 million that is available and is in keeping with the practice of underspending. And Minister, the 107 homes were not new homes. They comprised of 57 refurbishments, 48 emergency caravans, 1 group house and 1 first-time buyer's grant for the purchase of a caravan. So that's not even new or additional accommodation. Minister, underspending by local authorities has driven an underestimation of need, which you accept, which in itself is predicated on inadequate monitoring procedures, which the government's own report in 2017 found to be the case in local authority areas. Over 20 years since the Traveller Accommodation Act, families in need of accommodation has more than doubled in the state. There are 5 times the numbers of people sharing, accounting for 4,460 people in overcrowded halting sites and in standard housing. Also, 517 travellers, separate to those living in substandard and overcrowded and shared accommodations. And this equates to travellers being 11 times. We have a housing crisis, a homeless crisis, but travellers are 11 times more likely to be homeless than the general population. There were 162 families renting in the private sector in 2002 and now 2,387 families, and all the discrimination and prejudice which the IREC report showed that those families are subject to when looking for accommodation in the private sector. There is no provision for nomadic tradition, a criminal offence since the introduction of the criminal trespass legislation in 2002. So there is widespread, and you accept it in your statement, under-delivery, and there is cross-party agreement here on underspending and underestimation of need and local and political opposition. The Housing Agency's report review of funding for traveller-specific accommodation also captured that. And I commend your commencement of the review of the Traveller Accommodation Act, and I absolutely accept your bona fides here, Minister. I know you are taking this seriously and you are wishing to make progress. And I welcome the report of the expert group, which I understand will be there in April. And I also welcome your admission that the state has failed to deliver homes for travellers, and that is something that we have to address. And I think we have to give absolute proper consideration to an independent statutory body to draw up, in consultation with local authorities, a national programme for provision of travellers. We can't go on letting the failures of local authorities to deliver time and time again, because it's one thing for the local authorities not to do it, but it's people's lives we're talking about, and the lives of children and their prospects and their life chances living in absolute unacceptable conditions in a country that is as wealthy as Ireland. And also that you would be open to making an amendment to omit Part 8 of the Planning Act, currently conditional to traveller accommodation. And that you also, it's heartening that you referred to the European Committee of Social Rights, and that you are looking at that report as well and going to address those findings against the state. And the IREC report, which I mentioned, which found that travellers were 22 times more likely to be discriminated against by landlords in accessing private rented accommodation. And I have a lot more to say. People have mentioned other things already, but I look forward to your response. There is cross-party support for the work that you're doing, but we do want action, because every day that we don't act is a family and a child and its life chances missed. The health, how can you be healthy? There is a difference in the life expectancy of 15 years for a traveller man, 11.5 for a traveller woman. Mental health statistics are off the scale. How can you live a good life? How can you get to school? In Spring Lane, you have to walk across a muddy field. Children's shoes to get to school are wrecked and destroyed. And if you don't get to school, you don't get a job. 80% of a rate of unemployment in a country that's almost at full employment. So there is urgency to this, and I hope that you were bold in your recommendations, and that we do see a huge change in how we address traveller accommodation in this state. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.